Hello everyone, Seraphin here, welcome back for some more Pokemon Soul Silver. When I last left you guys, we were in the middle of trouncing around through Sprout Tower and utterly wrecking all of these poor Sage fellows with my Spearow, because that's what you do. And we're just kind of moving on up through the tower here, taking out everybody we see along the way, who, as you might imagine, in a place called Sprout Tower, all have Bellsprouts. I think a couple of them later on in the higher levels are going to have, like, Hoothoots or something. I'm not sure how that relates to Sprout Tower, necessarily, considering I don't think Bellsprouts are big fans of birds, personally, but at any rate. So, I've talked a lot last episode about game mechanics, specifically like status conditions and how stats work and all that fun jazz. There's a lot of ground to cover in these games. I'm not sure how in-depth I want to go, necessarily, because there's a lot to get into. Especially when you get into the more advanced, like, theory crafting stuff, and, like, breeding for competitive and all that fun jazz, which I have dabbled in. I'm not going to say I'm any good at it, because, well, I'm not. My very limited experience with competitive battling is very short-lived, because, well, I'm not very good at it. It's not that I don't understand the theory behind how battling works, and, like, you know, what moves do what and who's good against who and all that jazz, but there's people who are a lot smarter than me and put a lot more effort into team building than I do, and quite frankly, I just don't have the patience for it, which seems odd, right, because I play a lot of games where it's very much centered around tactics and strategy and stuff, but there's so much depth to Pokemon and competitive. It's a lot more than you might outwardly think. A lot of newer players make the mistake of thinking that these are simplistic games because they're supposed to be for children and there's nothing in the way of, like, advanced mechanics or anything like that. That is very much not the case. Ooh, a Ghastly. Seems appropriate. We're running through Sprout Tower here in the middle of the night, so why wouldn't there be ghosts? Now, the fun thing is, Fury Attack will not work because Ghastly is a ghost type. A ghost is immune to normal type and fighting type moves. Now, I say that, I still think it's vulnerable to status-afflicting moves, so I potentially could still use Leer or Growl on it. I just can't Fury Attack it because that does damage. So we're going to go with a Peck and see if it survives. If not, we'll just move on to something else. Okay, it does survive. We can probably capture this one. And the nice thing about Ghost being immune to Normal in fighting is that Normal is also immune to Ghost. So Spearow, being part Normal type, is not affected by Ghastly's Lick there, which is a Ghost type move. That is why it said it did not appear to do anything, or did not affect Spearow. Spearow cannot be licked, strangely enough. There are a couple of moves in the game that allow you to bypass this immunity in certain situations. For example, if your Pokemon gets a move called Foresight, which I believe Hoot gets, it allows normal-type moves to work on... Whoops, I didn't mean to name him. It allows normal-type moves to affect Ghost types. There is something that Growlithe can get called Odor Sleuth that does very much the same thing, I believe. Normally, also, in this generation, and actually in every generation, Psychic moves do not work on Dark-type Pokemon. However, there is a move that Psychic types can get called Miracle Eye that allows Psychic moves to work on Dark-type Pokemon. I believe when you use a move that allows you to affect a type that normally would be immune to your moves, it just does normal damage to them. It's not super effective. They don't resist it. It's just allowing it to hit them as if it were a normal hit. That being said, it does not account for the secondary type that Pokemon may have. So, for example, if a Pokemon is Dark and Psychic, in the case of something like Inkay or Malamar from Gen 6, even if you used Miracle Eye on it to allow Psychic moves to work on it, it would still resist them because the other type it has is Psychic, and that resists itself. It wouldn't double resist from Dark, because Dark just normally is immune to it. But anyway, so yeah, that's one of the examples of a more complicated mechanic that's available. I would say more complicated, that's barely scratching the surface in terms of competitive strategies and things. So, we've talked a little bit about Pokemon stats. What we haven't talked about is individual values, or IVs, as they're commonly referred to. Or abbreviated as, I suppose. There's also, I think it's determining values is sometimes what they're called, so DVs or IVs, take your pick. And all that means is every Pokemon is unique, unless they're somehow have identical IVs. So what are IVs? Every Pokemon has an individual or determinate value for each of their 6 stats. So HP, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed. And those hidden values, so to speak, you don't get to see them. They're hidden for a reason, I presume. There are ways to determine them, but it involves a lot of calculations, and you can't really do it from within the game unless they're perfect. But even then, there's very limited ways to do that. So, what is an individual value? Well, when a Pokemon reaches level 100, you can actually determine what their individual values are. So an IV is a number between 0 and 31. And what that means is that is how much better or worse that stat the Pokemon is going to be when they're at max level. So, say for example, a Pokemon has an IV of 31 in their attack stat. When they reach level 100, their attack stat will be 31 points higher than a Pokemon with a 0 for an IV in their attack stat, even if they're the same species and everything else, accounting on the same nature, everything else accounted for. So that number can fluctuate between 0 and 31 for each of the 6 stats. And a 31 is considered to be perfect, a perfect IV, because it can't go higher than that. So if a Pokemon somehow manages to have 31 in all 6 of its IVs, it is a perfect Pokemon. It cannot be better in terms of its raw potential. That being said, there's very little you can do to influence Pokemon IVs. Whatever you encounter in the wild is what you get. It is not very likely that you're going to end up with Pokemon that have more than 1, maybe 2 perfect IVs in the wild. It's just generally not going to happen, simply because of the random aspect of it. That being said, there are certain methods by which you can obtain Pokemon with better IVs in later generations of the games. I think one of the best examples of this is in the Friend Safari in Generation 6, specifically in X and Y. If you encounter a Pokemon in the Friend Safari in X and Y, they are guaranteed to have, I think it's 2, maybe even 3 perfect IVs. That being said, you don't get to decide which 3 stats are perfect. It's completely random. But I think it might be only 2. It's at least 2, might be 3. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, encountering Pokemon through that means will guarantee you at least 2 perfect IVs. So perfect 31 and 2 stats. And there actually is a way to influence and potentially gain Pokemon that have perfect stats on a more likely basis, and that is done through breeding. The breeding system in Pokemon came out in Gen 2. It was not something you could do in the original Red, Blue, and Yellow. Started with Gold and Silver, and has only expanded every generation from then on. Breeding used to be very difficult, very nuanced, very complicated, and there was a lot of restrictions and rules that governed how bred Pokemon would emerge from their eggs and what their stats would be like, what moves they would know, that kind of situation. That particular mechanic has expanded greatly through the generations, and if I were going to sit here and talk about all the different things you can do with breeding Pokemon, we'd be here all night. In fact, breeding is one of my favorite things to do in the Pokemon games, is breeding Pokemon for competitive, even though I don't play competitive. What I'll do actually is, if I have friends that want to play competitive and they want to build a certain Pokemon a certain way and they don't want to breed it themselves, I'll sometimes do it for them because I actually enjoy doing that. But needless to say, there are methods by which you can ensure that Pokemon get certain IVs or even certain perfect IVs through breeding. You can ensure a perfect moveset through breeding. There's a lot more certainty and control you have when trying to build the perfect Pokemon or perfect Pokemon team when you do the breeding mechanics. Catching things in the wild is generally not going to be what you want to do for competitive, because the things you catch in the wild are just not going to be as good as something that you breed and raise yourself. And that actually opens the door for another thing that you can do in Pokemon that makes your own trained Pokemon better than a wild one, and that is effort values, or EVs. But we'll talk about that more in a second here. So this is the Elder Sage of the Sprout Tower talking to our rival and telling him that apparently he's not very nice to his Pokemon. No, I never would have guessed. I mean, the guy that stole his Pokemon isn't very nice to them? Huh. He's very full of himself, that's for sure. Now, normally when you encounter your rival, that means you're going to fight, but in this case, he's going to wuss out and use an escape rope and get out of the way. I'm not sure why he needed to use an escape rope for a 3-floor tower, but at any rate. So this is the Elder. We're actually supposed to encounter him. He's like the final boss of the Sprout Tower, so to speak. How is Chikorita doing? She's on level 9. Why don't we put Chikorita in the lead for this? I'm going to get her some experience, too. I keep saying her. It's a dude. And I'm making that mistake my own self, so my apologies for that. Let's go ahead and talk to the Elder here. I am the final test. Alright, yeah, let's do this. I got this. He actually has a really cool looking character model here. Elder Lee is his name. We'll probably flatten this poor Bellsprout without too much trouble. Simply because we are going to resist all of his moves with, unless he uses poison something or other, but I don't think that's very likely. Yeah, Vine Whip we're going to resist without any problems. Take a whopping 2 damage from that. I wish I had something like Leer or Tail Whip to reduce his defense, so I'd be doing more damage to him, but that's okay. I have Growl to reduce his physical attack, but again, we're taking 2 damage already. He's not very threatening, I'm not going to bother. Oh, Growth, good. That increases his special attack, which he's not using right now because Vine Whip is a physical move. I don't think Bellsprout learns anything in the way of special moves until much later. I'm going to be honest, though, I've never actually trained a Bellsprout, so I don't actually know what they're capable of. But I figured, what's the point of me raising a Bellsprout when I've already got Chikorita as a grass type on my team? So, while I'm doing this battle here, I can talk a little bit about effort values. So, what are effort values? Well, effort values are the measure by which your own Pokemon that you've spent time training and battling in the wild and with other trainers, effort values is what makes trained Pokemon stronger than wild ones. When you find a wild Pokemon and you capture them, they have 0 effort values. They have not engaged in battles. They have not, so to speak, applied any effort to their training, if that makes any sense. That's kind of where the name, I think, originates from. So, when you battle a Pokemon and you defeat a Pokemon, whether it's a wild one or a trainer one, you will gain effort points. And the effort points that you gain from defeating a given species of Pokemon is dependent on that Pokemon's base stats. So, for example, if you were to battle... Oh, geez. If you were to battle something along the lines of, say, a Pikachu, which is very fast, you would, generally speaking, be gaining effort points towards speed, because that's Pikachu's highest stat. If you were to battle something like Geodude, you'd probably be getting effort value points toward defense, because Geodude's got a lot of defense. So what you can do to kind of influence and gain some extra points on certain stats is to battle things that are good in that stat. And you can find out online what Pokemon gives what effort values by defeating them. There's I'm sure there's a chart online somewhere. But generally speaking, whatever that Pokemon is best at is what kind of values you're going to get from defeating it. So, that being said, there is a hard cap on how many effort points you can gain. And I think it's to the tune of 255 effort points for any one stat, because it's as high as it goes. And then you can never have more than 510 total, which seems like a weird number, I know. What that basically allows you to do, though, and here's the fun thing, for every 4 effort points you gain to a certain stat, that stat is going to go up by 1 point. And what that ends up being, because you can get 255 in a stat, you divide that by 4, it turns out to be 63, or what is it? Good lord, it's just shy of 64. If it were 256, it would be exactly 64, but because it stops at 255, you can get at most 63 extra points in a stat at level 100. And that scales up and down depending on what level you are. So you can have maximum effort values at like level 5, but you're not going to see the full stat benefit until much later in your leveling experience. You should be able to stand up to Falconer. Who is Falconer? Falconer is the gym leader of Violet City. So effectively what you can do is you can raise a given stat by a Pokemon by 63 points. And that's if you put in 252 effort values for that stat. And that's because it's effectively high. You don't want to waste those other 3 because you're not going to get another stat point out of it, and you have a hard cap on the total. So what you can do is you can raise 2 stats by 252 effort points each and get 63 bonus points in both of them. And then you have 6 effort points left over. That's enough for 1 point in another stat and then 2 useless EV points you can't use. Why they decided to go with this kind of calculation for that, I don't know. But effectively, what you can do is maximize your Pokemon's strengths, or maybe shore up their weaknesses. based on what you battle and how you EV train them. EV training is very difficult and very involved. I don't recommend it on a regular basis. Like, just playing through the game, it's not worth it, because honestly, it's very difficult to keep track of how many effort points your Pokemon are gaining as you're just playing through the game. If you had just hatched something and you wanted to EV train it, that's one thing, because you can kind of do it in a controlled environment and go and encounter only specific Pokemon that only raise certain effort points. But when you're just playing through the game and encountering all manner of things, it really isn't worth it. And honestly, you're not going to be using the Pokemon you just get throughout the course of normal gameplay for competitive anyway. Not if you want to have a chance. So, ultimately, you're only going to care about effort points and effort values when you're trying to breed a Pokemon for competitive. What the heck kind of berry is it using? Really? It's got a Chillon berry? Unbelievable. Alright, well, you know what? I'm just going to potion up real quick because I don't want to die to a freaking Pidgey. Not a Pidgey, a Rattata. Holy smokes, I don't know what species this thing is. So yeah, if you're concerned about effort values and their effect on your Pokemon during normal gameplay, don't. It's not worth it. But individual values or IVs and effort values or EVs are definitely something you need to understand if you want to properly breed a Pokemon for the competitive scene. And there is a very big competitive Pokemon battling community, not just in Japan or America, but around the world. It's actually a major esport, believe it or not, Pokemon battling, and there's entire leagues built around it. And it's a very serious deal in some parts of the world. As I mentioned, I'm not really big on it myself. I understand a lot of the theory crafting. I know a lot of the terminology. I can understand Pokemon competitive battling from a purely theoretical standpoint, but I am not good at it in practice. So, if you want to know how to do it, I'm happy to teach you and help you understand, but I cannot do it for you, needless to say. And I'm not going to be doing any competitive battling on this channel. Again, I'm not good enough at it. I'm sorry if that disappoints some of you. Maybe you wanted to see me do some of that, but you're going to have to deal with me just kind of going through the game as it is. Also, I don't know how I would manage to do competitive battling on this emulator anyway. I don't think it would work very well. I don't think there's anything in the way of networking code or anything like that, or like system link kind of situation going on, so... I don't really need this Weedle in my party, do I? I don't plan on using him. So we'll go ahead and put him in the box too. There's not really anybody I need to use right now that I've already captured, unfortunately. There's a lot of overlap, or it's somebody that I've already trained and can't use, in the likes of Geodude or Ghastly, so, or Pidgey. So right now we're still kind of limited to our two-person team here. Hoping to increase the value or the numbers here shortly, but we will have to wait and see how that goes. We are definitely not ready for Falkner. He will mess us up. He has flying-type Pokemon. Specifically, he has an under-leveled Pidgey, or Pidgeotto, rather. It's like level 9 or 10 or something, and that thing doesn't evolve till 18, so the fact that he has one that low is actually kind of game-breaking, but I digress. Let's head down this way real quick first, and grab whatever is in this tree. Looks like a yellow apricorn, or a Euler apricorn. I don't know why I say that, but anyway. Yellow apricorn. So, down here is a little patch of grass. This patch of grass is actually not in the original Gold and Silver. Normally, if you wanted to access any Pokemon on Route 32, you had to go past this guy. And this guy actually does not let you through until you beat the gym. But once you do beat the gym, he actually gives you a prize. So, anyway, the advent of this patch of grass allows us to capture things that normally we wouldn't have been able to have access to until after the Violet City gym. We don't have Bellsprout yet. Why don't we go ahead and catch one of those? No, I mean, I'm not going to use the dang thing, but might as well try to get one, just because Pokedex is important, everybody. So yeah, talked a little bit about individual values and effort values. There's a lot more to go into with, like, methods of EV training. There's ways to maximize your effort value gains with items and with other fun things, but I'm not going to go into that just this minute. Like I said, we'll be here all bloody night. I've talked about natures a little bit. I don't know if I really got super in-depth into them. Maybe I'll bring that up in the next episode. There's a lot more to go into, but I'm going to try to get to as much of it as I can. Some theory crafting and some mechanics and all that fun stuff. Oh, shoot, I was trying to catch this thing, wasn't I? Wow, I got totally sidetracked and blanked out and realized I was killing it and not capturing it. At any rate, we'll try to actually capture a bloody Bellsprout in the next episode. So, sorry about that. At any rate, we'll talk more about mechanics, and I'll catch some stuff. So until then, I will see you guys in the next episode. This has been Seraphin. Thank you very much for watching. Stay classy, internets.